Welcome friends. In today's video, we learn how to implement JWT based authentication for microservices using API gateway and Spring Boot. You would have watched our previous video on JWT authentication where we explained how the request flows from the API gateway to the authentication service and how the token is generated and how is it further used for authentication purpose. There were a lot of requests to show a code implementation for this. So today we have brought that for you. So let's get our hands dirty in the code. So friends, this is the code. You can check, you can pull this code from my GitHub, which is called e-commerce. So here we have implemented an API gateway and we have also implemented an authentication service. So if you see, I have imported this code in my IntelliJ. And one more thing, this is the main video where I have explained the authentication logic using JWT for a set of microservices. So you can watch this video for theory. And today we are going to learn about the practical implementations, as there were many comments users who wanted to see the implementation. So let's get into the implementation. So this is the implementation. We have implemented an authentication service and we have also implemented an API gateway. So let's first study about the authentication service. Okay, so there are many components in this authentication service. And if we check the pom.xml, so pom.xml is used for dependency management. So what we have used here, we have used Spring Boot starter data for our database interaction. Okay, we have used Spring Boot starter security. So starters, manage the version themselves. So you can use the starter dependency and it will configure the appropriate version on itself. And we have also used Spring Boot starter web because we will be creating some REST endpoints. Okay, so there are other dependencies, for example Lombok. Okay, then there are some JWT specific dependencies. Okay, now we have used OpenAI. This is for Swagger, and this is the database which we'll be right now using, which is S2 database. S2 database is an in-memory database, so we can externalize our database as well. We can use Postgres as well. That we'll cover in another video. But right now we are using a temporary database, which is an in-memory database. Okay, so this is the S2 database, and then there are a couple of testing dependencies. Okay, so as you are aware that Spring Boot @Spring Boot application is the entry point for a Spring Boot application. So wherever you put this application, that main method will actually start your Spring Boot application. You can see that in the main method what we have written, spring application.run. Okay, and we have given this class. So this will start the Spring context. It will register whatever beans you want it to register, and then your application will be ready to perform the function for which it is designed. We have created one more additional bean here, which is a command line runner. So basically this bean will run once. It is a one-time running operation. So what I'm doing is I'm creating two users beforehand. So one is admin user and other is a manager user, and I will explain why I have created two users. So this is so that we have a user when we start. Otherwise I can call the web endpoint as well and register a user as well. I can do that as well, but right now for simplicity I have pre-configured two users for us. Okay, so this will pre-configure our users. Now let's visit other classes in this code. Okay, so the first and the most important package here is the config package, and in that we have 3 or 4 configs, but the most important to implement security is security config. Okay, so in this class you see we have two main beans. One is a security filter chain. It creates a chain of filters that the request will go through one by one. So it will start with the chain filter 1, filter 2, filter 3, filter 4. Whatever chain you configure, request is bound to go through that filter chain. And then I have this cross configurer, cross site script, cross CQRS, cross site scripting. It is not relevant to JWT authentication, but it is required when we use a web application to log in into this service. Okay, so let's see the most important thing that is required here. This is our filter chain. Okay, so it takes a security object, HTTP security, and then you can configure your security logic here. This is the heart of security of your Spring Boot microservice. This is the HTTP object. So for I have disabled CSRF, which is cross site security. Then I have established some authorization rules. For example, first of all, I have some whitelisting URLs, which is, our authentication endpoint, because this is the endpoint that we will take to authenticate into the system. After this, everything should be authenticated, but to authenticate, you should have one public endpoint, okay, through which you will log in into the system. That should be public. So that is why this authentication endpoint is public. And then there are some documentation, Swagger documentation and API documentation endpoints, which can be public, because this is, you are not exposing your services here. You are exposing some documentation, you are exposing a Swagger, you are exposing these things. Okay. So we have injected many things here. So we have injected authentication filter, JWT authentication filter. We have injected the authentication provider, and we have also injected a logout handler. We'll see all of them one by one. So first, let's see how do we establish authorization. So first of all, for all these whitelisted URLs, which is Swagger and our special authentication endpoint, I have specified permit all, means no authentication is required for them. Now I have some management APIs in my application. For that, I have specified, for example, for management star, a role should be admin or manager. So either of the admin or manager can access this endpoint. And for example, I have further implemented a fine grain of authentication, which is, in this API, if you do a GET request, then the user should have admin read authority or manager read authority. And for post request, again, admin create or manager create authority. For put request, you should have admin update or manager update. For delete, you should have admin delete or manager update. So if we see, this is the enum where I have configured my permissions. There are different type of permissions there. We can see admin read, admin update, admin create, admin delete. Similarly, manager read, update, create and delete. These are my different permissions that I have in my application. Okay. So this is where we have authorized who gets to access what. Not everyone will be able to access everything. So there is, selective access implemented. And there is a user detail endpoint as well. So for this, I have implemented role-based authentication. Only admin can access this. And this is the one that we will test today. Okay. So only admin can access, manager cannot access. So we will test this. Okay. And then I have specified any request, whatever request comes should be authenticated. Okay. So for this, I have implemented authentication. I have given, I don't want any specific session management. So it is a stateless. It is not maintaining any state. Okay. Now comes authentication provider. Okay. So if I click on this authentication provider, it comes to this dependency in Spring. Let's click here. So basically it is an interface authentication provider. I have implemented in this config here. So this is the bean that we have created for authentication. It is returning authentication provider object. What are we doing inside this? We are creating a DAO authentication provider, and then we are giving our user detail service. Okay. So if we see what is our user detail service, it is basically our user service. It has our user repository, and basically it can get the user from the database. So there is another method to change password. Okay. And whenever we save the password, we use this password encoder which is there. So we encode the password and we save it then into the database. Okay. And basically this user service is used for, saving and retrieving user from database. It implements a user detail service interface. This interface is also provided by the Spring framework. Okay. So this is the custom interface. You can see it is provided by the Spring security. Okay. So this is a Spring standard interface, and using this interface, if you implement this Spring interface, you can create a standard user service for saving and retrieving the user from database. Okay, so we were creating authentication provider. So we have specified that we will be authenticating using a database interactions. That is why we created a DAO authentication provider. So again, this is a Spring provided class, and we have set our user detail service here, and we are returning this bean. Okay, so going back, this authentication provider will use our user service. Okay, and it will interact with the user repository and then the user table to get and update our user, basically get the user. Okay, so now here I have added two filters. Okay, and I've used the method add filter before. This means before the request goes to the actual controller or the actual API that you are calling, since it is a before, these filters will run before the request reaches the actual API, and you can pass as many filters as you want here. And if the first filter is able to authenticate the request, the second will not be called. If the first is not able to authenticate the request, then the second will call. You see, you are passing first authenticating using JWT. So if the request you have received has a JWT, then I will show you the logic that is inside here. How do you check the JWT? So suppose if the authentication passes, then there is no need to do some other authentication. But if the request doesn't have the JWT, then you need to authenticate the request using a username and password authentication filter. Okay, so if we click on this, this is again a sync provided class, and it can authenticate your credentials, which is your username and password, and using it can easily authenticate if whether you are a legitimate user or not. And then there is the logout mechanism as well. Okay, this is the heart of the security of our application. Okay, and then the major classes are, this is our authentication controller. So you can register a user, you can authenticate a user, and you can refresh the token of a user as well. Okay, so we'll talk about refresh token in the next video, so please stay tuned and watch it. But today we'll study how the authentication works. So when you call the authenticate endpoint, it will call the authentication service. Okay, and we have implemented it here in our services. You can see we have the authentication service. So it will call this authenticate endpoint. So it will authenticate your username and password from the database, and then it will create a JWT token for you. It will also create a refresh token for you, and then it will revoke any existing tokens that were present for you. It will revoke them, and then it will return you the user. Similarly, we have our user controller. This is used to fetch the details of the user. Okay, but it will only be able to be called for an authenticated user, not for a not authenticated user. Okay, let's run, and there are some pojos available in this class. Then there is a token repository which is managing the tokens in database, and there is a user repository which has a user managing the user table in the database. So since we are using H2 right now, when we start our Spring Boot application, H2 will create a table for this user. It will create a table for this token, and this way it will process the request. So now this is a brief walkthrough of the code. We saw our config packages, we saw our filters, and we saw our services, and we also saw our controllers. Okay, now let's try to run this code. Okay, so we can see here that we have started our authentication service. So it is started on port 8080. Okay, let's skip the breakpoints for now, and we can see that here using Hibernate, H2 will create our tables for us. We can see that it is creating sequence for our tables. Then it will also create table. We can see that create table token, create table user details. So it is creating the required tables for us. Since we are using H2, which is a temporary storage, but for the purpose of this demo, it serves the purpose. Okay, then you know it will initialize your database correctly. Okay, now if you remember here, we added two users as well, right? So you can see insert queries for these two users. Okay, and we registered them as well, so we have a existing token as well, but we'll not use this token. Okay, so now our application has started. So now let's try to log in into the system. Okay, so I have Insomnia, which is just like a postman or a tool to send your REST request. Okay, so I will first call the service directly. So I will call the API authenticate endpoint. Okay, let me switch on the debugger. So when I call this, you see this is the heart of the security of our application. It has reached JWT authentication filter. Okay, so here what I've implemented, if it is an authentication endpoint, just do the next level of filtering, whatever is there in the chain. No other processing here is required. Okay, so it will go inside this and it will return from here. Okay, this will reach our authentication controller, which we have implemented to the authenticate endpoint, and we can see that here we were passing two things, email and password. We are passing two things in this request. It has reached our authentication endpoint. Now it will call our authentication service dot authenticate. So we'll call our authentication service for the authenticate endpoint. So what we will do inside this is, first we will try to authenticate from database whether this username or password matches or not. Okay, so we'll create a authentication request and then we will call authentication manager. So this authentication manager, if you see, is a Spring provided object, and we saw that we were using a database authentication manager. We had created a bean earlier. Okay, we saw it that it was created here. This bean, this will use the user detail service and then it will run the authentication operations. So once we authenticate it here, you see it is running the Hibernate query. It is running the query to select the username, and if you check the logs, this is debug level log that I've enabled. We can see that the user is authenticated. Okay, now if this line has executed, this means authentication is passed. In fact, it means I username and password has matched, have been matched with database and they have passed. So now we can retrieve the user by doing a request.get email. So request has the email of the user, so we can retrieve the user from the database. So we can see that we have received the user, everything, all the details, his role, password, everything we have received. Now we can generate a JWT for this user. If you would have watched our previous JWT theory video, JWT contains all the informations required for the user. It contains the name, it contains the email, it contains the role. Of course, sensitive information like password it doesn't contain, but all general informations we add into our JWT, and it is up to us what do we want to add into the JWT. So after calling the JWT service, we can see that this is the JWT token that is generated for the user. Similarly, we generate a refresh token. We'll talk more about this refresh token in the upcoming video, but yeah, let's focus on JWT token here. So this is how a response is returned to the user. If you see, so you see this is the response that we get. We get an access token and we get a refresh token. Okay, so let's copy this access token, copy, and now we will try to access the user details. But in order to access because it is a secure endpoint, you have to pass this JWT token as a header in this request. So if you see header here, we have specified the content type, and this is the important thing, that in the authorization header you need to pass this token. If you don't pass this token, you will not be able to call this API. If I send it, then again I will reach our authentication filter, and since it is an unauthenticated endpoint, it is the authenticated endpoint, we'll skip this part. Now we will fetch the header, and we'll check whether we have the bearer token as well. So if it is not having the bearer token, then this filter has no role. It will pass the request to the subsequent filters. But if it has the bearer token, we will take out the JWT token. If we see here, this is our JWT token. Okay. So now using this token, we will fetch our user email ID. So you extract username. We are calling this extract username method in our JWT service. So it will get us the username. And then if the username is not null, which means really the user exists for this JWT, then we will fetch all the details of the user, and then we will validate whether the token is still valid, whether it has not expired or it has not been revoked. Things like this we will do. So this we find that it is neither expired nor revoked, so we have found it as this variable has to be true. Okay, so if the JWT is valid and if the token is valid, then we will create in in Spring application there is a security context, very pretty much similar like a session in HTTP servlet applications, but in this context you save these informations. So we save the authentication information, which is this, it contains whatever all these permissions this user has, which user has which permissions, this kind of permissions, and user principal details like name, password, etc., encrypted password, of course, email, etc. This is saved, and then subsequent filter chain is called. Now this will finally allow you to, whether if the JWT authentication passes, then this will allow you to reach this detail endpoints, which is the actual endpoint that you called from Insomnia. So you call this user detail endpoint, then we are able to fetch the user details from the application. Suppose if I give a wrong JWT, for example, if I just change one character here, change something here, okay, I just spoiled the JWT. If I again send this request, what will happen? You can see that it is reporting this is a broken JWT. Okay, it is reporting a broken JWT, so it will not allow me to access the user detail file. For example, it is giving 403 forbidden. And suppose if I completely remove the authorization block here, okay, I completely remove it, and then if I again send this request, suppose if I completely remove this authorization block, and now if I call, we can see that authorization header is null, so authorization is not present. Still we will not be able to call our user detail service. Now let's try to do one thing. Now let's try to log in as manager and see whether as a manager can we access this user detail service. So what I will do here is in the authenticator endpoint, instead of logging as an admin, here I have created two users, admin and manager. I will log in as a manager. So let's try to log in as this manager. So by login, you mean you have to call this authentication endpoint and it will give you a token. Okay. So you call this endpoint. We have already seen the flow for this. So we get the access token, the JWT token for this manager. Now using this token for manager, if we try to access the user detail service, and if I use this endpoint and I pass the manager token here, now let's see what happens. It has again fetched the token. It will be able to fetch the user as well. Now it has set the user in the context and it will call subsequent set of filters. Okay. So we will see that's again after, even though the JWT authentication was successful, we were still not able to call this our user controller details object, which we were able to be called for the admin. Why? Because here in security config, we have added this role matches admin. And for the manager, the role was manager and not admin. So this way, you can add selective access to APIs for based on roles, and you can do sub classification as well. In roles, you can also add a sub classification on authority. So role or underscore operation. So this is how we specify subsequent authorities. So this is the role and this is the action that the user can take. So you can create a more fine grained API level access using authority or a simple API level access using role. Okay. So this is how you pass the JWT token. Before it reaches the controller, you have to do some filtering. You have to check whether token is present or not. If token is not present, then do other filtering. If token is present, whether it is valid or not, whether it is expired or not, whether the user exists or not, and then do other filtering. Okay. So this is the flow for authentication. This is the code for authenticating JWT using for Spring Boot microservices using JWT. And we have explained in our code earlier that we should be never be calling our services directly. We should be calling them using API gateway. So here we have API gateway application as well. In this, there is one simple config, which is it checks whether auth, if the auth is present in our request, then it will redirect the request to our authentication service, which is running at 8080, and it will remove the auth from the request. And we can configure other routes in our API gateway. If you don't understand what is API gateway, we have a dedicated video about API gateway in our channel, so you can watch it as well. So whatever endpoints we called here directly for the authentication service, we can call them indirectly using API gateway as well. So API gateway, we have configured it to run on 8081 port. We pass this auth in front of our at the beginning of our URL to signify that we want to use the authentication service, which we have configured in this route for our authentication service. Okay, so if we see here, similar authentication we can call on 8081, which is a separate microservice API gateway. If we call this, again the request reaches here, and the same flow will run for our authentication service. It will be able to generate a JWT token for you. You can see the token is generated, and then you can use this token and you can call the API gateway endpoint for the user detail service. Again, you need to give this auth to signify that take this request to the authentication microservice. Okay, again you need to give it the updated token. Okay, and if you call this, you can see here that when the request eventually reaches your authentication service, the auth part in the request will be removed as well. It is API v1 user details. You had sent auth API v1 user details, so this auth is getting removed. And where is it getting removed? In the API gateway, we have written to strip the prefix. Okay, so the first prefix, it is stripping, and now it has reached your filters, and after filtering it will go to your user detail service. So you see, since we are using admin, we are able to access user detail service, and this way you can fetch the required information. So we can fetch the same information using API gateway as well. So friend, in this video we have just saw the authentication flow, the code flow, how we configure filters, how we use filters, what logic do we add in filters, and how do we configure authority based on roles and based on a more granular level of roles using authorities. So how we can configure authorization in our application as well. I hope you like this video, and you can watch the JWT theory using this video here, and you can also learn about API Gateway using this video here. So I will add these links in the description as well. I really request you to support our efforts by liking this video more and more, showing your love, showing your support, subscribing to our channel, and please press the bell icon for notifications as well. Thanks a lot for watching. All the best.